came together. You know, there are no coincidences. There are only unexplained circumstances. We have the Phoenix Lights on March 13th, the 50th anniversary of Roswell coming up, and lo and behold, that was the year that the Air Force decided, out of the goodness of their hearts, that they were going to finally come clean on Roswell. And so about a month or so before the 50th anniversary celebration of the crash, they published a book called Roswell Case Closed. I think it was actually, the main author was Captain McAndrews or somebody like that. They talked a lot in this book about the dummy drops over the desert, that people thought they were aliens and all of that. I eventually talked to the man who was actually in charge of that project for dropping dummies, and they were doing parachute research, and he actually in retirement came out and said that he was pretty angry with the Air Force for misusing a program that he was very proud of. But that's parenthetic to all this. But back to 1997, so we have the Phoenix Lights, we have Roswell Case Closed, and because it's the U.S. Air Force talking about this, you know, highly controversial, well-known case, CNN was all over that story. Roswell Case Closed, et cetera, et cetera. Well, June saw that on television, and it backfired big time in her case because she still had my business card. She called me at home, and I had not heard from her in 4 years, and the first thing she says, "It's a damn lie." And I said, "Well, good to hear from you, June." And we proceeded to start talking about UFOs and the fact that she had worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, when she was a young woman.
Oh my goodness!
And it just opened. She had changed her mind. She decided that she was going to tell her story, and that I was the person she was going to give it to. And she told me that her cancer was in remission, but I don't think in retrospect that was really true, and I think she kind of knew that was the case because she only lived for about another year.
Oh my gosh.
But I asked her, I said, "Why are you willing to talk to me now and you weren't willing to talk to me then?" And I'll never forget her words. She said, "I'm 72 years old and I've outlived 2 husbands and my cancer's in remission. What are they going to do? Shoot me or put me in prison? I can do either one." Well, I wasn't born yesterday. I said, "Well, how soon can I be at your house?" And I will tell you, this is kind of a personal note, but Joanne and I, although we are very, very happily married, there was a time in our relationship, and this was back then, where we were kind of on again and off again, and at that point in time we were off, and I would get off work late at night and change into my civvies and drive to Ocean Shores from Aberdeen and end up sitting up half the night over a pot of coffee talking to June about her life and my life, and we became friends, which obviously that's not the ideal way to do an investigation, but it's the way that it evolved. And she decided to release her life story to me. She gave me all the documents to prove where she worked. I independently verified that through the National Personnel Record Center. And I'm starting to get. I have a little. Yes, I have. Excuse me, I'm getting a bit of a frog in my throat. But
you're doing well.
It was an amazing time. She and I became friends, and I certainly will always treasure that friendship. And even if she had never told me anything about UFOs, I was utterly fascinated because she told me fascinating things. For instance, she grew up in Dayton, Ohio. She told me if you wanted a good job there, you worked for the government. Before Pearl Harbor, December 7th of 1941, she was there the night that they found out at Wright Field, because there was no Wright-Patterson Field then. In fact, there was no Air Force then. They found out about Pearl Harbor. They sent out trucks of soldiers. There wasn't even a fence around the place.
Oh, my gosh.
They put out soldiers' sentries where each sentry could see the next one in order to secure the facility until they could build a fence and turn it into a base. And of course,
there was an immediate reaction to Pearl Harbor was that Wright Field was unprepared at that point, and
everybody was unprepared.
Yeah.
I know that from my own father and my mother, who were in the San Francisco Bay Area when all of that happened. The world changed like 9/11. Only, that Pearl Harbor was like 9/11 back then.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But she told me what it was like to work in a top-secret laboratory, what it was like to be an office manager and be around scientists and engineers. She had the same security clearance they did because she was handling top-secret information. You have to bear in mind there was no such thing as an internet. Nobody had a computer screen. You used a typewriter. In her office at night, they had to take every single piece of paper and the ribbon, the ink ribbon, out of the typewriter and secure it in a safe because everything they did was highly classified.
Yeah, you're talking. I never thought of that, but you're right. The old-fashioned manual typewriters had these typewriter ribbons that would go through on spools, and they wouldn't use necessarily the same section over again until it got to the end of the spool. So if you actually took that ribbon, you could recreate documents in that regard.
Exactly. So see, she knew all of the details. She was sent to interview a high-ranking German scientist. She was absolutely convinced that it was Wernher von Braun. But it was June who brought up the fact that nowhere in his biography could you find any reference to him being at Wright Field and being interviewed.
Interesting.
Although at that point in his career, see, Wernher von Braun was originally here as a prisoner, not as a guest.
Wow.
But like many of the Project Paperclip scientists, once they were here, they were given such a sweet deal, and efforts were made to bring their family over from Germany, etc. Pretty soon, they went from being prisoners who were basically brought over here to help us with our fledgling space program. They ended up getting such a sweet deal that they became, part of our country and became U.S. citizens, etc. over time.
Yes.
Well, she had all of these stories that went with that, plus she had some extremely important UFO information.
And this is what is exciting to me. I want you to share with our listeners now what you learned from June Crane as you're sitting around her house over coffee or how it happened. I want to hear that story. That's going to be great.
Well, number one, I would go right to the heart of the matter. She rocked my world by telling me that when she was there, by the time she left in 1952, when she left government service, that the U.S. government knew about not one, but 3 UFO crash retrievals.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, it was probably almost 3 years after she died that I had that independently verified when I was involved in a special research group that was headed up by Bob Wood and Ryan Wood, and had some of the key researchers in the entire field, more especially Roswell. And one of the things that came up in the group was that there was not one, but at least 3 different UFO crash retrievals. So all these things that she told me about ended up being independently verified, and here I am hearing it from somebody who actually worked there. She told me about a man who was a friend of hers and a friend of the other people in her group who was a cargo pilot. And he came in one day and was having coffee with June and her friends. They're sitting in a break room, and this guy is white as a ghost. He looks very upset, and he starts talking about a crash and how he flew in from New Mexico with bodies and wreckage. And it was one of those weird conversations because they thought that he was talking about, that probably one of their friends had been killed.
Yes.
Somebody that they knew, that this was a crash of a military plane. And as they kept talking, this pilot realized that they weren't on the same page. And he said, "You don't understand. They're not human." and corrected everybody in the group.
Do you think this would have been potentially the Kingman, Arizona rumored crash or something in that regard?
My understanding was in retrospect, she thought it was Roswell.
Oh, man. Okay. Got it.
So this was part of the evacuation of the bodies and the wreckage that were flown. I think the wreckage was divided up and flown to a number of places. The bodies, I think they certainly were brought to right.
And didn't she describe the bodies specifically as like child-sized with greenish skin?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So, she knew all the details, and June did not have, when I visited her in her home, although she had books on Werner von Braun because she was trying to solve the riddle of why she couldn't find it in his biography, but she didn't have 2 shelves of UFO books in her home.
Right.
So she wasn't, well-versed in the subject. She told me also that one day an officer came in and he was flirting with her. And he pulled this piece of metal out of his pocket about the size of a business card and threw it down on the desk, and he says, "You're a good worker, June. Tear this up." and she tried it with her scissors. And I think you know where this is going. She couldn't cut it, couldn't break it, couldn't pierce it, and you could wad it up into a ball, and it would go back to its original shape. It flowed like water, and it weighed nothing.
Whoa.
Well, I tried to kid June a little bit. I said, "June, that's 50 years ago. You've been around a long time. You've seen, miracle plastics and all the great advances that we've had since then." And she put me right back in my place and said, "No, you don't understand. Nobody makes anything like that."
Oh, so she's saying that not even Mylar, not even the new plastics that we have compared
they don't act like that. They're not that strong, and they don't flow like water to go back to their original shape. They're just, no matter how good our packaging is, it wasn't like this strange piece of metal that she was shown. Well, she, at the time, asked this officer, she says, what is this? And he bends down and he says, "It's a piece of a spaceship." And she says, "What is it really?" And he bends down and he gets kind of quiet and says, "It's a piece of a spaceship." And about that time, somebody else starts to walk through the area, and he does one of these numbers where he grabs it, sticks it in his pocket, turns away and pretends that he wasn't talking to June.